Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Lifetime Legacy Lawyer podcast. I'm your co-host, Thomas Vick, joined by my co-host, Seth Wilson. Seth, how's it going today?
Thomas, I'm doing great. We are in the midst of apparently monsoon season here in central Indiana. Wow, we've had some pretty incredible weather the last couple of days. So hopefully everything is safe and good with you. We are here, although we had power outages and internet outages today at the offices. So we may talk about some of that today, actually, as part of the podcast topic. But everybody's safe and good. So how about you?
Last night was insane, actually. We hadn't talked about that, but I saw two or three massive trees just toppled over. We went to Wednesday night Bible study last night, and the power was out. So the entire congregation went to a different church and joined the other church for their service, and it was great. But yeah, the weather was insane yesterday. But glad everything's all right. I don't think anybody's basement flooded from the sump pump going out or anything like that. So we're all good. And yeah, hopefully we don't have as much rain here in the middle of the month of June, which brings me to kind of what we wanted to talk about, mid-year review, kind of analyzing where your practice is in the middle of the year. What are some things that we should be thinking about as attorneys at this point in June, middle of the summer? What should we be thinking about? And let me just open it up to you, Seth. What are some things that we should be thinking about in the middle of the year as attorneys?
Great question and great topic to kind of say, all right, how are we doing? So we've talked a lot about on the podcast about planning and making sure that we have goals set out for the year and that we're reaching toward those accomplishments. So now is really a great time to take I think a realistic look at that and understand kind of where the numbers are for you in terms of your goals and maybe identify those areas that may be a little behind or maybe trending okay and those kind of things. So we can talk about more of the specifics here in a second. But the other thing that this most recent sort of weather pattern has brought to mind is what are your systems and how are your systems doing as well? So, for example, just today we had an internet outage at one of our offices and it's widespread, right? We had a lot of storms come through. There's I think cell towers are probably down and power lines and different things. And so that's affected that office capability. So, what is that sort of backup plan to that system that you have in place when things go down? How do you get access? How do you communicate? How do you work through those? And so, really, a good time to check through kind of those checklists and systems that are in place and identify maybe where there's some areas for improvement and then get a plan for installing those improvements, so to speak, within the next few months.
Yeah, yeah, great topic. Certainly, I'm just kind of thinking off the top of my head some backup plans that you could have. I mean, a lot of times you can turn your cell phone into a hotspot, and I don't know exactly the security of that. You may have some major concerns about that kind of thing, but yeah, certainly having backup systems in place is important when it comes to law office technology.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that these types of opportunities bring to mind, we talk about a lot on the podcast, the question that reframes the scenario of what does this make possible? And obviously it's not original. That question is not original to me. There's lots of other folks who have brought that in, but I've really tried to, as soon as I can sort of process whatever that decision is or the challenge that's ahead of us and go, okay, we're facing this, but let's take a look at it and really think through what can we do better now. And so our main office, we have multiple redundancies in place, but the same level of availability in the other offices isn't really there in terms of service. And so now we have to kind of be creative and think outside the box about that. Typically, I would say, you have your primary internet source and you have a secondary that fails over from the primary automatically through your system and how that's set up with your folks. Then you have other ways, like you mentioned, potentially your phone's hotspot or something like that. But even today, we discovered that if the service providers in that area have impact to their network because of everybody else doing the same thing and trying to, keep things moving while you're waiting for that primary internet to come back up, that can impact and degrade service down the line. And so the particular provider that some of us had access to was not as strong as other providers. And so just identifying those potential gaps and going, okay, in that event, is this going to be enough to get us through? Maybe it is, maybe it's not, maybe you need to look at other opportunities.
I just had lunch with an attorney, not in my law office, but she was telling me about one day when there had been a strong winter storm, ice storm. She had prepped everything, had turned the water on, dripping, everything like that. But she walked in the next morning and almost all the pipes were fine, except for one. And that one pipe was above her desk. And when she told me that, I thought I might be weeping, actually, if that had happened to me. And I think she pretty much said, yep, that was about right. And she talked about how, over the course of the next few weeks, she had frozen the papers that she could recover. They were still wet, but she put them in the freezer and she would take out a file or two each night and pull the papers apart and then let them dry overnight. Like she said that she saved, 90% of her files or something like that. I mean, crazy kind of stuff. And she said, that's why I go to, I'm paperless now, pretty much, instead of having all those paper files. And that's one advantage of technology is you can store client files on the computer in the cloud and then on your hard drive so that you've got a backup and you're not going to be dependent on good weather and not having any natural disasters, things like that. You don't really think about that kind of stuff very much, but one of our ethical responsibilities is safeguarding client information and making sure client files are safe and all of that. And weather is, I guess, a part of that, right? And we got to be prepared.
Yeah, and it's amazing, again, what that brings to mind because you don't think about it when everything is working well, or even if you're trying to anticipate sort of disaster preparedness. And so, one of the big things that folks will talk about if you're trying to simulate that kind of activity is, think of everything that can go wrong and test those systems in the meantime. Well, when you're sitting in your office and the power goes out, what do? And if your computer is a desktop computer, for example, and does not have a uninterruptible power supply, it'll just shut off and whatever you're working on is just gone, right? You can't save any of that. It's going to be out the door. So if you have a laptop, the battery will kick in typically, and you'll have a minute to save that at least to the local device before it would get uploaded to the cloud or something like that. But those are things you need to think through and you don't really anticipate, especially if, like me, I use a laptop primarily, and some of my team members have desktop computers. And so we were all sitting in the office yesterday, and that dawned on me of, oh my goodness, that's something we've got to address moving forward, because the risk there is that you've been working on something for a long time and you lose part of it because of the power situation. And so, how do you navigate that? What adjustments to your plan are you going to have? And then take the opportunity to sort of say, okay, in the event of a disaster, what are we going to do? Do we keep everybody here in the office? Do we make everybody go to the basement? Just practical things like that, as well as considering, okay, yeah, if the ceiling above my desk caves in, and I've had that happen to me in my practice, so I can resemble that remark, if you will. It's not a good day when you walk in and the half the ceiling is sitting on the floor now and on your desk. And so having the ability to get that cleaned up and back up and running pretty quickly without getting overwhelmed by it is really important.
Yeah, absolutely. Having backup plans like that in place. I love the state in which law practice finds itself right now, where you can be mobile. You don't necessarily have to be tied to your desk if you don't have a desktop, that is, and just the cloud, and just a lot of things that are available to us now that we didn't have, several years ago. law practice and planning for natural disasters and things like that a lot easier.
Yeah. So that's kind of a rabbit trail. I don't know that we were anticipating going down today, but it is very top of mind in terms of kind of handling and addressing those types of things that come in. And so, always want to make sure that as you are building out your systems and doing reviews of those systems, it's not just the goals and things that you're trying to accomplish, but looking across all of the systems and checklists that you have in your office to ensure that consistent delivery of services to your clients. And so that's definitely one of them that really can interrupt flow and really interrupt the ability to get things done and accomplish your goals. And so Thomas, as you kind of think through the year, what are some of the routine reports that you like to look at to kind of gauge performance on the year and maybe identifies areas for improvement?
Yeah, well, at the beginning of the year, we set out revenue goals. So that's one of the goals that I'm looking at. How am I doing? Am I ahead of schedule? Am I behind schedule? Am I right on schedule? And, something that I've picked up from you over the years is, well, if I'm way off on my revenue goal for the year, then let's readjust that to make it meaningful. A goal is really only helpful if it's meaningful to you, if it's obtainable, in other words. And so reevaluating whether it's, within reach for you to make your revenue goal, you need to be thinking about that. And if it's not reachable, bring it down a little bit if you need to, or maybe raise it up a little bit. Maybe you're halfway through the year and you're 75% to your goal. You probably need to reevaluate and have a monthly goal to have a greater revenue goal at the end of the year. And so reevaluating that, maybe resetting goals is something to think about here at the midpoint in the year.
Yeah, I think that's a great reminder because when you're setting a goal, it's a goal, right? And a lot of times we want to set a stretch goal to push ourselves to achieve something more than we did the year before. But we don't always control on the day to day what kind of cases we have access to and what may show up to do on a particular year. And so it's in the law practice, it's always going to require adjustments to match reality. And you can have the highest goal in the world, but if you don't have any cases coming in the door, you're never going to reach that goal. So, what's realistic in that? And what is motivating to you? Because if you are so far behind the goal that you feel defeated, you're not really going to do your best work moving forward. So I think the reality of being able to be authentic with yourself and saying, okay, I really want to achieve this, but maybe not going to be able to this year, that's okay. Let's readjust that and get that inertia and momentum restarted to achieve it in the second half of the year. And so if you're trending in a particular direction or you see a staff member trending in a particular direction, you want to start having that conversation, understand what is driving that metric one way or the other, and then present a strategy for how to adjust it and work through it. And again, keep in mind that there's usually some sort of reason behind what's going on there. You don't want to just come in and say, hey, you're not meeting all your numbers and we need to get this all figured out. We're working with people from a client perspective and from a team member perspective. And so you want to make sure that you're understanding kind of the full context of why things are there and give folks that encouragement to move forward.
I think that's a great point. What are the drivers that are helping individuals to achieve the goal, or what are the hindrances that are putting an obstacle in front of somebody in reaching a goal? And understanding that's really what's meaningful in the law practice. It's not really so much what are the dollars and cents coming in. It's really like what's the process, you and I love sports, and all the coaches and all the players talk about it's the process. And it really is, even in law practice, it's about the process. So understanding what's happening underneath the surface and not being so much results oriented, but rather process oriented, making sure that processes are in place that will allow somebody to achieve the goal. And it might be that you don't have things lined up just the right way to make that goal achievable. And that's where you do some self-evaluation. Maybe you have a meeting and talk about what's working, what's not. One of the big takeaways I got from reading the book Good to Great is having a committee of people that are always striving to improve processes in the organization, and everybody having a voice in that. And what are the things that we're doing well, what are the things that we're not doing well, and trying to make improvements. And it really helps people to be committed to the organization, I think. And I think it just helps the results, even though you're not necessarily as focused on them.
Yeah, and I think to build on that, when you take the concept of practicing, one of the big things that you'll hear is getting in repetition. And that's a lot of what the law practice is getting in those repetitions and going through the case and getting that experience, or going through the meeting with the client and learning how best to help them process through whatever that situation is that they're facing. And the repetitions are sort of measured by the time entries, if you will, that you put onto a particular matter. And so you want to utilize those numbers as a way to demonstrate that you've been working and putting in the reps and getting better each and every time. And so the idea there being, it obviously has to be accurate and it has to be correct, but that's sort of that scorecard that you can measure yourself to of, hey, I'm really doing the work and I'm documenting it and I'm going through. Now, we talked about a couple weeks ago, you don't always bill for everything there, but you are doing the work that gets things through to the finish line and get them completed. So I'm kind of mixing metaphors there in terms of sports, but
Running,
that's
repetitions, yeah.
in the finish line, right? But the idea being there needs to be a way, I think, in today's sort of knowledge-based world to measure what you're doing, because everything is electronic and it's really hard to know, okay, when you mow your yard, you can see progress being made and you can see sort of a start and a middle and an end because the results are right there. When you're doing knowledge-based work, you send another email, you get 3 that came in after that. How do you know that you moved things forward? And so some of the times just having those metrics like the billable time goals and the revenue goals and those kind of things can really help you feel like, okay, I am moving forward, or I am accomplishing something. And I can look back over a period of time and see that consistent effort over time and see the results that it produces. And so that's why the numbers are encouraging to me a lot of times of, okay, if I'm consistent every day putting those reps in, when I get to the end of the week, I'm going to have a pretty good analysis of what I did that week. Was I effective as that I could be that week? I'm not going to be capturing 100% of your time. I don't think any lawyer can do that. There's just too many interruptions and things that come throughout the course of a week. But I can get a pretty good measuring stick. And then I have a month, and then I have 3 months, and now I have 6 months, and so those are really helpful to see as I break it down and think about the rest of the year. Do I need to make any adjustments based on what I have in? Do I have enough work to keep me busy here? Can I, adjust those goals to make that more realistic? Or is it something that now I'm coming up on a busier season than I anticipated, and I need to make some other adjustments for that in terms of external commitments and those kind of things? So really good to take that analysis and take a look at it midway through the year.
Yep. And another number that you might keep in mind is your marketing numbers. I keep track of how many new prospective clients come in, and some people call and then we don't actually have a meeting. Some people have a meeting and then they go away. And then some people have a meeting and they retain and hire us and all that kind of good stuff. But keeping track of those numbers. And if you have certain marketing efforts that you're doing, for instance, online marketing or maybe seminars or something like that, knowing where your clients are coming from is so important so that you can evaluate, well, are my marketing efforts being effective, or are they not as effective as I was hoping that they would be? And you can adjust, your decision making for the rest of the year based upon the results that you've got from your marketing records.
Yeah, that's a great point because you want to understand, I think the temptation is when you get busier in your practice, you spend less time marketing. Well, the reason you were able to get busy in the first place was from those efforts that you may have done beforehand. And so, and lawyer marketing is a little different than normal kind of marketing that's out there, but the concepts are similar. And so, kind of thinking through, like, don't neglect the repetitions, to keep that analogy going, on the marketing front while you have a lot of work to do, because once you get through that period or season of work, you may find yourself with a gap because you weren't keeping up the efforts over time. And so, what's the old adage with marketing? Half of what you do works, you just don't know which half.
Yep.
Like, you don't want to stop those efforts, but really doing what you just suggested, which is analyze what really works well and then continue to fine tune those and focus on those areas, and trying to identify the 50% that doesn't work is really a worthwhile exercise.
Yes. Seth, we've talked about a few different things. We talked about, planning for natural disasters and weather issues and power outages, and we've talked about mid-year evaluation, revenue goals, marketing goals, all that kind of stuff. A lot of different things that attorneys, law office owners, small firm attorneys need to be thinking about. And that's just what we do on the Lifetime Legacy Lawyer podcast. We help lawyers launch, and we hope that people will reach out to us with questions, through the YouTube comments or through the email, website, all that kind of stuff. We encourage people to, subscribe to the channel. If you like this video, hit like, subscribe to the channel, and that will just help us to help other attorneys as they try to navigate the choppy water sometimes of law practice management.
That's right. That's right. And it's so much fun to just have this conversation. Hopefully it's encouraging to others who are considering this, that they maybe just get to peek in on what we're talking about, sort of some of the challenges that you face, some of the fun that happens as a result of running your own practice, and all of the little tools and things that we've learned over the years, just mainly by making mistakes, right? So we share that to help other people avoid that and really develop that lifetime legacy practice that they really want to enjoy. And I think one thing that I've been thinking about, Thomas, as we close today, is there is this concept that there's an impending attorney shortage. And one of the ways I think that can be addressed really well is through solo and small firm. And I think that's a really unique thing. And hopefully, this podcast can provide some resources to those who may be going into a legal desert, an area where there's just not a lot of lawyers for whatever reason. Maybe you're going back to your hometown and to practice in a smaller or rural county, and you need those resources that are available. And that's one of the things we hope to help, because I think the firm and the small firm, solo and small firm area can really be impactful for folks in providing legal services to those who need them.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, anything else we want to talk about?
Not today. I think we got some fun stuff lined up for the future. Working on getting some additional folks who have solo and small firm experience and ideas on running firms and what it takes to get there, and like to do some more of those interviews in the upcoming weeks as time goes on. So looking forward to that, and just, gaining some wisdom and experience to share with others.
Very good. I'm looking forward to those interviews as well. I think that'll do it for today. We'll talk to everybody later.
Thanks, Thomas.